Okay, good morning. I know that I still have to provide you with some clarification on the LLC in halacha, or the limited partnership in halacha. When, good morning, when looking at what the definition of one's assets are, that's how we really got onto this topic, is that when collecting a loan, you are entitled to go after someone who owes you money, let's say for wages and things like that. Even there's no prohibition. That's what we said. There's no prohibition of low egos, that you're not allowed to oppress someone who doesn't have, right? If someone has assets, and also, this halacha of lo egos, so do not oppress, only applies to the poor man. It does not apply to a person who's, let's say, of means, but would have to liquidate some of his holdings in order to pay you back the debt. Okay, so let's go on. There will be a shir in the future about LLCs. That's not for now, but that's how we got onto this topic of how does a person, what is the halachic relationship to a business that you set up with its own separate liabilities and funds. When the business goes bad, what is the personal responsibility of the person who's the CEO? Someone was telling me, it's Mordechai, was telling me in the parking lot that he was telling me that particularly in Quebec, this happens all the time. I don't know why, but apparently people will set up businesses, go mechula, declare bankruptcy, and then start all over again. And it happens quite with great. What is civil? Sorry, I'm for my ignorance.
French-based law that's not based on precedent.
Interesting. Okay. All right.
It may be coincidental. It may just be the nature of how people operate, but it is a difference in law as well.
Okay. All right. There you go. Maybe they'll become their own country one day. Who knows?
You're going to be taken off YouTube. Be careful about what you say.
Okay. Sif Gimel. Asur la'adam laharos lebal chobo bizman sheyodea she'ein lo. Leheraot, excuse me, not leharot. Leheraot. Asur la'adam leheraot. It is forbidden for a person to appear to his debtor when he knows that he doesn't have the money. Vafilu la'avor lefanav, and even if it's just walking past him. Mipnei shehu nichlam bir'oto lamalva, ve'ein yado maseges lifroa, because it creates embarrassment to the debtor when he sees the creditor and he knows that he owes him the money and he doesn't have the money to pay him back. So far does the creditor have to go to not bring shame to the debtor, that you should actually physically avoid the debtor to whatever extent that you can, to avoid embarrassing him. Maybe it does it now. The question is, does it mean I got to daven at another shul, daven at another minyan? Like, to what extent do I have to go to avoid shaming the debtor that owes me money? We'll see. Well, it could make it worse. It depends on the nature of the relationship, I suppose. Well, let's see. We'll look at some of the notes. Do not be to him like an oppressor. The lo noshe mamash. Even if you're not literally oppressing him and pressing him for the money, but even just standing in front of him and saying, "Oh, how do you like the herring?" Right? Could be viewed as an embarrassment if he knows, and you know that he knows, and he knows that you know, that both of you are thinking about this looming debt that is over his head. That's right. That's right. So let's take a look at the Imrei Yaakov. Asur la'adam leheraos v'chulei. So Afagav the Gemara Mapikla Mikra de Losielo Kinosha, he says, even though the Gemara derives it from the letter Chaf in Kinosha, like an oppressor, he says, Mikol Makom Ein Bo Lav Eli Isura, Ukra Smach the Ba'alma. He says this is not really a biblical prohibition, but it's really just a rabbinical, fence around the halacha. And that the pasuk is really what we call an asmachta. It's not to be taken literally. The Chamosha Kosav Kan Harav B'Sof the Alzer Ramaz HaKosav. This is what is alluded to by the pasuk, but is not being literally communicated by the pasuk. And leheraos vafilu lavor lefanav, and even just walking in front of him, or just walking past him, he says, "Perush lo mi boi." He says, not only is it prohibited to deliberately walk over to him so that he can see you, because the fellow's going to think that the reason you came over to him is because you want to remind him and you want to put a little pressure on him. But even if it's just to walk past him, so it's not so blatant, it's not so obvious that you're in his face. It's still going to be aser. But it seems that that's only if that's your intent. Like I could choose to walk a different path, but I walk deliberately in front past him so that he should get the message that, hey buddy, don't forget me, I'm still here. Aval im over lefitumo shari, but if you're just passing by because it's the simplest path to get from A to B, and he happens to be there, you're not obligated to take a circuitous route just because you see the fellow there. Although probably midas chasidus, piety would say, if you know that by walking past, by going that way through the Kiddush hall, he's going to see you, you may wish to avoid it. Yes. Yes, and I'll be honest with you, I do understand it. Maybe because I don't know. I do understand the idea that once you've done your good deed and that other fellow is in your debt, try to avoid him. Back off, right? Back off because it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing to be in someone else's debt. And please God, none of us should ever have to know what that feels like, but it's a very uncomfortable feeling to be in someone else's debt. And there's always a need that we all have to make sure that we're not in someone else's debt. Like in other words, even when someone does me a favor, I try to do them a favor back as quickly as I can. There is that tendency within human nature. I don't want to be beholden to anyone, right? Can you sympathize with that? Yeah, right. So anyway,
Uh-huh. Because if this goes on for a long period of time, it becomes more difficult. It's short-lived.
Right. The prohibition is of losielo kinosha is only one that once the debt has matured and he doesn't have the ability to pay you back.
Okay, that's also interesting.
Yeah.
When it comes to it.
I believe so. I don't think that there's a prohibition. You lent the guy money yesterday and you daven at the same minyan. What's the big deal? He doesn't owe you anything yet because the debt hasn't become due. So I don't think there's any prohibition in that situation. Okay. So in the Biurim, he writes as follows. He says, "V'yesh lehistapek im rotza labor lefanav lefitumo ve'en kavanaso klal kedei lahachlimo." Like, what happens if you just want to walk that way? Your objective is not to remind him or to embarrass him. Hayim gamba ofen ze asur. Is it only asur when your intention, did the rabbis prohibit you from walking in front of him only when your intent is going to be to remind him, embarrass him? Or is it even if that's not your intent, but you just, you want to get to the herring plate at the Kiddush and he happens to be there? Like, do you have to not have herring that Shabbos in order so that you don't?
All the herring will be gone.
That's right. That's right. Maybe the rabbis did not require you to circumvent your normal path for the sake of avoiding this guy. So the whole basis of this halacha is from the Gemara in Bava Metzia. It says, how do you know that if someone owes you money and you know that they don't have the ability to pay it back, that you're not allowed to walk in front of them? And so it's based on that pasuk that we just quoted. Harambam hosif ekasav asur la'adam leheiraos lebal chovo, va'afilu la'avar lefanav shelo yafchida o yachlimu afal pi she'eino tovo ad kam lashana. In codifying this law, the Rambam uses the following words: it is not permitted to appear before your debtor, even just to pass in front of him, so that you do not frighten him or embarrass him, even when you're not demanding payment. Okay, that's the way the Rambam codifies this. Perhaps you could say that this language of to appear before him or to pass in front of him, those are two different terms which seem like the same thing. Maybe the difference is that one is when it's done intentionally and when it's done unintentionally. Dahainu bereisha kasov leheoros lefanav dehu miskavin lovo b'miuchad likraso, u'b'sefer shosef afilu laver lefanav rotz lamer b'li kavana degam ze aser. Maybe that's what the Rambam means, that using both terms means regardless of whether you're intending to embarrass him or you're not intending to embarrass him, don't pass before him. He says that would basically imply, if we're going to interpret the Rambam's language that way, that would imply that it would be usher even if it's not your intention and you would be obligated to try and avoid the guy. However, Ivra nira de'in ze kavanas haram, but I don't believe that's what the Rambam is saying. Ela kavanas olomar delomi baya leheiraos lo dain ulovo negdo laros atzmo lefanav da'azu margish debiyasu gedelodacho lachlima. It says, the first statement of the Rambam is to deliberately stand in front of the fellow so that he feel that sense of embarrassment and intimidation. Devadai aser, that you're not allowed to do. Ela afilu heicha she'eno banegdo rak over lefanav shaz eno bolei kol kach hadavar mikol makam aser. But beyond that, the Rambam says that even if you're just walking past him, where you're not like front and center in his view, but you see him at the Kiddush and you just decide to casually saunter before him so that you make sure he sees you, but you're not lingering there. Even that is asr. That's what the Rambam is saying. But that's when your intent is to sort of, hey, buddy, make sure you see me. I want to make sure you don't forget your debt to me. But it could be that the Rambam is not at all talking about a situation where you just want to get to the herring plate and it's got nothing to do with him owing you money. He says, the Aruch HaShulchan also writes an additional caveat. And he writes that if the matter has already become an old issue, in other words, a lot of time has passed since the debt has been due. You've already told the fellow, don't worry about it. Whenever you get the money, you'll pay me back. So we've been davening at the same minyan now for months, okay? And so the debtor doesn't feel anymore a sense of embarrassment. And if the creditor's intent in davening at the same minyan is not to embarrass him, but it happens to be there at the same minyan every day, so then there's no prohibition at all. What But it sounds like from what the Aruch HaShulchan says is that if the matter has not become familiar and already old and familiar, he says, Asur gamim ein miskavin lazeh. It sounds like that even if it's not your intention, you should try to actively avoid the guy. Avolanias daiti nira de'ein lesar bazeh. But it seems to me that you should not go so far as to prohibit this and obligate the creditor to actively avoid the debtor. The Harei Kvar Kosav Halecha Mishnah de Leheiraos Lefanav Ein Bo Iser Torah Ukras Machta Ba'almahu. Mina Torah Ein Osir Rakecha Shenog So Bepeh Ayin Sham. The Lecha Mishnah says explicitly, like we saw in Imrei Yaakov, that this whole law is rabbinic in nature. That if as long as you're not verbally assaulting the guy, then there's no biblical prohibition at all. It's only rabbinic, the whole thing, even if you stand mamish in front of the guy. And therefore, why should we be so machmir on this rabbinic law? Where we would need a strong evidentiary case to argue that the rabbinic ban goes on even when it's not your intention to embarrass him, that you have to actively avoid him. He says, "The imlo miskavin lazein la asr d'rebemes de'ein zepsik reisha shabal chobu yicholim." Some of you were arguing up until now. He says, "How do you even know the guy's going to be embarrassed by virtue of the fact that he's going to see you?" Some of you have already raised the idea. He's a friend of yours. Maybe he's appreciative to you. Maybe he doesn't feel any kind of embarrassment from you at all. So we know that there's a principle called davar she'eino miskavin. It's something that's not your intent to happen. Like, I just want to get to the herring. My intention is not to embarrass you, but I have to live my life. We live in the same community. We daven at the same shul, and I can't go around after I've lent you money evading your presence. Okay. And so therefore his attitude is that there's no prohibition at all, as long as it's not your specific intention to be in his face. There are even some poskim who say that barring the laws of Shabbos, as long as it's not your intention, even if you know it's inevitably going to happen, it's still permitted with rabbinic prohibitions. But in our situation, it's not a psik reisha. It's not definitely going to happen that he's going to be embarrassed. It's also not your intention. He says, and therefore it seems that it's only prohibited when it's your specific objective to make a point of standing in front of him, or to remind him that he owes you money by passing before him. But to actively avoid the fellow and go out of your way, literally to go out of your way, in order to avoid him, I don't think we should be so machmir. So that's a very interesting analysis, right? What if the guy says, every time I see you, I'm embarrassed because I owe you money? And so why would a person say that to me? Obviously the guy is, so I say to him, so what do you want me to do? You want me to daven somewhere else? You go daven somewhere else. If you're embarrassed to see me because you haven't paid me back, that's not my problem. But I'm not obligated to disappear from the public square. If you're so embarrassed, so you go daven at a different shul or at a different minyan, right? That's a very good question. So Errol's asking, would it be better for me to arrange that a person get a loan from the Free Loan Society instead of me lending him money from my own money, in order to avoid an awkward situation with him that he feels constantly indebted to me? So I would tell you as follows. I think you also don't want to give up the opportunity to do a mitzvah, right? So why would I give up the opportunity to do something a true chesed for someone else? Oh, I'm not going to do the chesed for you because I don't want to embarrass you. Go to some agency and they'll do the chesed for you instead. I would say as follows. I would say that, and this there are people who set these things up. There's a foundation that can help you out. And by the PS, he doesn't know it, but it's my foundation, or I donate to that foundation, right? So if I'm giving money to the Free Loan Society so that the Free Loan Society can give out loans to people, that would be actually, I think, a better way to go, because you're creating anonymity. And we know from Hilchos Tzedakah that it's much better to give to someone without them knowing who the giver is, right? So if you can, it only stands to, logic only dictates that if you can replicate that anonymity with loans, by sending the guy to the free loan, which you're supporting, then it would seem that would be okay. Okay. All right. So this is very good, right? This is very good. Okay. Now, let's see. So let us go on to the next halacha. Halacha Daled. Asur lelove lichbosh mamon chavero shebiyado velomar lo lech v'shuv umachar ete. It is now, we've talked about the sensitivity that a creditor needs to have for the debtor. Let's talk about the obligations of the debtor to the creditor. It is prohibited for a debtor to hold on to the creditor's money and not pay him back, and to say to him, go and come back tomorrow and I'll give it to you. If you have the money, if you as the debtor have the money to pay the guy back, and he comes when the loan is due and he says, hi, I'm just here to pick up the money that you said would be available on such and such a date for me to collect. And you say, you know what, do me a favor, come back tomorrow. And you do have the money, but it's not convenient for you to pay him, or maybe you want to take your family out to dinner with that money instead of paying him back. He says that you're not allowed to do. That's a biblical prohibition. Shenamar al tomar l'reyacha, or maybe it's not biblical, maybe it's only, we'll see, because it's a pasuk in Mishlei. As it says, al tomar l'reyacha lech vashuv u'machar etein v'yeshitach. It's actually an explicit pasuk in Mishlei. This exact case is what King Solomon refers to. He says, do not say to your friend, go and come back tomorrow and I'll give it to you, if you already have the money available to you to pay. Doesn't say I'm going out to dinner, right? Yeah, but the exact case of where you seek to evade paying your debt for no legitimate reason. So yes, in a case where you don't have the money, so obviously, then the creditor has to be sensitive and not oppress you. But if you do have the ability to pay back, but it's inconvenient for you because you're going to have to liquidate some assets, or you're planning on taking the family to Florida with that money and you don't want to use it for this guy, and you'd rather push him off to some later time when you have the ability to pay it back without having to cut corners on your family vacation or whatever it is, that is absolutely asur. Okay, lichbosh mamon chavera, to hold on to your friend's money. So he says, Nechleku haposkim imutul chiyav tashlumin al halova lifnei shahamal v'tova'o. So here's an interesting machlokes. The creditor has not yet asked me for repayment, but the payment is due. So there's a machlokes in the poskim whether the obligation starts at the day when the loan is matured, or on the date when the creditor demands repayment of the debt. He says, some say that so long as the malva has not demanded repayment, then the lova does not have an obligation to pay. Even when the lova has promised that he will pay back on a certain date, you don't become obligated to pay until, or is biblically obligated to pay, until the malva says, can you please give me the money back? This, to me, is very bizarre. Okay, I have to tell you that this to me is very strange. I don't understand it. He says, "V'yesh cholkim usvir luhu degamim lo tiva'o chayav halo v'l'shalim, the prius balchov rachman chayive lifroa v'tzarachiyim." And others disagree, and they say that no, even if the creditor has not demanded payment, the Torah says, pay your debts when they become due, when they mature. That's what the Torah says you're supposed to do. And Rav Stern concludes with the words "V'tzarach iyun," or maybe he's just quoting the Shach. He says, but this needs more analysis. I don't really understand this. It would seem to me a no-brainer that when the loan is due, regardless of whether the creditor has asked you to pay the money back yet or not, you become obligated to pay. The loan is due. That's why I gave you I took a promissory note from you because I didn't want to have to run after you to pay back the debt. Maybe what if I tell you, listen, I'm not going to hock you a chinik to pay me back. In 30 days, when the loan is due, I expect a check in my mailbox. Please don't make me come after you. I mean, that would be my attitude. I'm not interested in going after a guy and saying, I am here to collect the debt. And then it's like 2 months later, and I say to the guy, I never heard back from you about that loan that you took out from me. Oh, well, you never asked for it, so I didn't think I had to pay you. That doesn't make any sense. Of course you have to pay it back. So I don't really understand the first position at all. I don't understand it at all. It doesn't make any sense to me, especially because of this whole idea of not wanting to embarrass the debtor. Like, yeah, how do they fit together? I don't get it. I just don't get it. So he says, even if the debtor promised to pay back by a certain date, I could certainly understand when I lend a guy money without specifying when he has to pay me back. I tell him, whenever you have it, you'll pay me back. I lent someone money that way once, and my wife finally told me it's Choshen, right? And that became the due date. And I said to the guy, I think I'm going to need that money, otherwise I'm going to be in trouble. So that was it. And so he paid me back the money, right? Which was very, very nice. I thought that was a wonderful thing for the fellow to do. I didn't, yeah.
So it sounds like you're allowed to ask for repayment, and that's not considered
Oppressing.
So are you only allowed to ask once, or?
That's a good question. Oppressing means when you know he doesn't have the money. Now, what does that mean? He doesn't have the money. So that was something that we were studying yesterday or the day before. I don't remember. Like, what does that mean? He doesn't have the money. What if you don't know? I've no way of knowing what assets you have and what you don't have. Just because someone tells me, oh, I don't have it. Why did you just go to Florida for Pesach? You don't have the money? I lent you $10,000. It cost you more than $10,000 to take your family for Pesach. Well, you don't understand. My in-laws, this, that, the other thing, right? Well, and then the guy sends his kids to summer camp. That must have cost you thousands of dollars to send your kids to summer camp. How come you're not paying me? Well, you don't understand. I can't leave my kids home all summer, but I still don't have the money to pay you back. There does come a point where you have a right to say to someone, I don't believe you at face value that you don't have the money. I think you do have the money, but you have higher priorities than paying back this loan. And, I'm very conflicted, by the way, on this issue of summer camp for kids. Someone just asked me for tzedakah to fund their kids' summer camp, and wants me to give them some charity, either from my own fund or from the shul's fund. What is your feeling about that? Is that something that warrants giving charity for? I don't know. Because I've always taken the attitude when I was raising my own kids, if I have the money to send them to camp, I will. And if I don't have the money to send them to camp, we'll figure something else for them to do. But apparently it's a big thing. For some people, camp is a really big deal. What is anyone have an opinion they'd like to share? All right, we're gonna hold it here for today, guys.